Andrew Mountbatten Windsor appears to have knowingly shared confidential information with Jeffrey Epstein.
Royal staff are refusing to work for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor following his move to Sandringham.
Newly released emails have revealed that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor invited Jeffrey Epstein to Buckingham Palace.
For years, Prince Andrew insisted there was nothing more to explain. But the release of the Epstein files has changed that. Emails, photographs, and timelines now raise deeper questions, not just about one man, but about how power, privilege, and protection operated at the heart of the British monarchy. For many years, the name Prince Andrew existed on the margins of royal discussion. He was neither central to the monarchy's future nor fully absent from public life. That changed when his long-standing association with financier Jeffrey Epstein began to raise serious public questions. What was once dismissed as poor judgment slowly evolved into a matter of international scrutiny. The recent release of court documents and related materials, often referred to collectively as the Epstein files, has renewed attention on events that, while not new, now appear in sharper focus. These records include emails, travel references, and personal communications that have prompted renewed debate about how relationships were managed, how decisions were made, and how accountability functions when public roles intersect with private conduct. It is important to state clearly that appearing in such documents does not, by itself, establish wrongdoing.
There are also new allegations about what went on at Epstein's Florida home 20 years ago. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has always denied he is seen with her, and the emails from G. Maxwell apparently appear to suggest that this photo is real.
However, the reason these materials have drawn such attention lies in the broader context. Prince Andrew had previously stated that he distanced himself from Epstein after learning of his criminal conviction. The documents, however, suggest continued contact for a period of time, raising questions about timelines and explanations previously offered. What makes this situation particularly sensitive is Prince Andrew's position at the time. As a senior member of the royal family, he carried not only personal responsibility, but also symbolic weight. His activities were often interpreted as reflecting the institution itself, regardless of whether that was fair or intended. In such roles, perception matters almost as much as action. Another key issue is access. Epstein, after his conviction, appeared to maintain connections with influential individuals across different sectors. The suggestion that he retained access to elite social circles has fueled broader concerns about how status can sometimes blur judgment. In the royal context, this raises uncomfortable but necessary questions about boundaries, oversight, and the limits of personal discretion. Public reaction has been shaped not only by what the documents contain, but by what they represent. For many observers, this is less about individual emails or meetings and more about a system that seems slow to recognize reputational risk. Critics argue that earlier transparency might have reduced long-term damage, while others point out that institutions often struggle to act decisively when uncertainty remains. The royal family has consistently emphasized that Prince Andrew is no longer a working royal and does not represent the crown in any official capacity. That distinction matters, yet it has not fully resolved public concern. Once trust is questioned, restoring it becomes a gradual and complex process. As this story continues to unfold, the focus is shifting away from isolated events and toward structural questions. How are senior figures advised? Who decides when? Association becomes liability? And how does a centuries-old institution adapt to modern expectations presenting unprecedented scrutiny? These are not questions with simple answers, but they form the foundation of why the Epstein files have resonated so strongly, not only in Britain, but internationally. Beyond Prince Andrew himself, the renewed attention has inevitably extended to the wider royal household and its internal decision-making culture. While Buckingham Palace has maintained that many of these matters are personal rather than institutional, the distinction is difficult to maintain when senior royals operate within a framework shaped by public trust. One recurring question concerns awareness. To what extent were senior officials informed about Prince Andrew's continued associations, and how much discretion was he allowed to exercise independently? Former aides and commentators have often described Andrew as operating with a high degree of autonomy, particularly during his time in international trade and diplomatic roles. That independence, once viewed as an asset, now appears to have created vulnerabilities. Another layer of complexity involves timing. The Epstein files did not emerge all at once. Information surfaced gradually over many years. In such circumstances, institutions often respond incrementally, adjusting positions as new facts become available. Critics argue that this gradualism contributed to the perception of reluctance rather than caution. The impact on the monarchy's public standing cannot be ignored. At a time when the institution is navigating generational transition, health, challenges, and evolving public expectations, prolonged controversy places additional strain on its credibility. Even those sympathetic to the royal family acknowledge that unresolved issues have a tendency to overshadow positive work carried out elsewhere. Family dynamics also play a role. Royal households are not purely corporate structures, they are families, with emotional bonds. Decisions are influenced not only by policy, but by loyalty, history, and personal relationships. This human element can complicate responses, particularly when the individual involved is a close relative rather than a distant associate. Internationally, the discussion has taken on an additional dimension. Because the British monarchy represents continuity and stability, any perception of unresolved ethical questions can attract attention beyond national borders. For some observers, the issue is less about past conduct and more about present accountability. It is also worth noting that silence can be interpreted in multiple ways. Some see restraint as respect for legal boundaries, while others interpret it as avoidance. In the modern media environment, absence of explanation often creates space for speculation, whether justified or not. Looking forward, many analysts suggest that clarity, even when uncomfortable, may ultimately serve the institution better than prolonged ambiguity. Clear standards, consistent enforcement, and transparent communication are now expected not only of governments and corporations, but of symbolic institutions as well. The Prince Andrew situation, viewed in this light, becomes a case study rather than an isolated episode. It highlights the challenges faced by traditional structures operating in an era of constant documentation, digital records, and global attention. How the monarchy navigates this moment will likely influence how it is judged in the years ahead, not only for how it handled the past, but for how it chose to respond once scrutiny became unavoidable. As attention has intensified around Prince Andrew, another important dimension of the discussion has emerged: how modern institutions respond when private conduct intersects with the public responsibility. In this case, the issue is not limited to one individual's decisions, but to how systems of oversight function or fail under conditions of privilege and trust. Prince Andrew's role within the royal family was unusual. Unlike the heir to the throne or senior working royals with clearly defined duties, he occupied a space that allowed significant independence. For years, he represented Britain in trade-related initiatives and international engagements, often operating beyond the day-to-day visibility of palace officials. This autonomy was intended to be practical, but in hindsight, it may also have reduced effective supervision. Observers have noted that such independence can become problematic when clear reporting lines are absent. In any large organization, especially one with symbolic authority, accountability depends on structure. When boundaries are informal, decisions rely heavily on personal judgment. The Epstein files have reignited debate over whether that reliance was misplaced. Another factor complicating the situation is time. Public understanding of events has evolved gradually. Information surfaced in phases, often through media investigations, legal proceedings, and third-party disclosures rather than direct statements. This fragmented timeline made it difficult for the public to form a complete picture, while also allowing uncertainty to persist. From an institutional perspective, delayed clarity can be costly. When responses appear reactive rather than proactive, confidence erodes. In the monarchy's case, this erosion is not confined to one generation. Younger royals, who were not directly involved in the controversy, now operate under the shadow of unresolved questions tied to the past. There is also the matter of consistency. Critics frequently point out that public institutions are expected to uphold clear ethical standards. When those standards appear unevenly applied, even unintentionally, it creates a perception of double standards. This perception, once formed, is difficult to reverse. At the same time, it is important to recognize legal boundaries. Allegations, however serious, are not equivalent to judicial findings. Institutions must balance moral responsibility with legal restraint, particularly when cross-border legal systems are involved. This balancing act often leads to cautious language, limited disclosures, and controlled communication, all of which can frustrate audiences seeking straightforward answers. Public expectations, however, have changed. In the digital age, silence is rarely interpreted as neutrality. Instead, it often becomes a canvas onto which speculation is projected. This dynamic places traditional institutions at a disadvantage, as their established communication styles were shaped in a very different media environment. The Prince Andrew case highlights this tension clearly. The royal family's preference for discretion clashes with a public demand for transparency. Neither approach is inherently wrong, but the mismatch creates friction. Over time, that friction can weaken the authority institutions rely upon to function effectively. Some analysts argue that this moment represents a turning point, not because it introduces entirely new challenges, but because it exposes existing ones. Oversight, clarity of role, and accountability are not modern inventions. They are foundational principles. What has changed is the speed at which lapses become visible and the permanence of digital records. Ultimately, Part 3 of this story is less about revisiting specific events and more about examining patterns, how decisions were framed, how responsibility was distributed, and how institutional habits formed in another era are being tested under modern scrutiny. The answers to these questions will shape not only how this chapter is remembered, but how similar situations are handled in the future. Part 4, 750 words. As the discussion moves forward, attention increasingly shifts from retrospective analysis to future implications. The central issue now facing the monarchy is not whether controversy occurred, but how it will be addressed in a way that restores confidence while respecting legal and constitutional limits. For many members of the public, accountability is closely linked to clarity. Clear roles, clear consequences, and clear communication help rebuild trust after prolonged uncertainty. In this case, the monarchy has taken steps to distance itself from Prince Andrew's activities, emphasizing that he no longer represents the institution. While this distinction is significant, some observers question whether symbolic separation alone is sufficient. Trust in institutions is cumulative. It is built over time through consistent behavior and eroded through repeated ambiguity. The longer unresolved questions remain, the more difficult it becomes to redirect attention to positive contributions made elsewhere within the royal family. This is particularly relevant as the monarchy navigates a period of transition, with future leadership increasingly in focus. Another challenge lies in public perception of fairness. In democratic societies, institutions are often judged not only by outcomes, but by process. How decisions are made can matter as much as what decisions are made. When processes are unclear, confidence weakens, even among those inclined to be sympathetic. International audiences also play a role. The British monarchy occupies a unique position as both a national symbol and a global institution. Developments affecting its credibility are observed well beyond the United Kingdom. In that context, unresolved controversies can take on a life of their own, detached from original facts and shaped by repetition. The Epstein files have contributed to this global dimension by circulating widely across media platforms. Each new reference, even when reiterating known information, reinforces the sense that the story remains unfinished. Closure, in this sense, is not simply about concluding investigations, but about addressing the underlying concerns that keep the narrative alive. Looking ahead, many commentators suggest that institutional resilience depends on adaptability. Traditions endure not because they resist change, but because they integrate it thoughtfully. Clearer internal guidelines, more defined oversight mechanisms, and updated communication strategies are often cited as ways to prevent similar situations from escalating in the future. It is also worth considering the human dimension. Institutions are made up of individuals, each operating under pressures that are not always visible. Mistakes, misjudgments, and delays can occur without malicious intent. Recognizing this does not excuse outcomes, but it does provide context for understanding how complex situations evolve. For the monarchy, the path forward likely involves balancing continuity with reform. Preserving symbolic stability while acknowledging past shortcomings is a delicate task, but not an impossible one. History shows that institutions capable of self-reflection tend to emerge stronger over time. The Prince Andrew situation, viewed in full, serves as a reminder that reputation is not static. It must be maintained through vigilance, accountability, and openness to reassessment. While the immediate focus may remain on documents and disclosures, the broader lesson extends far beyond any single individual. In the end, the question is not solely about what happened, but about what happens next. How institutions respond when challenged reveals their underlying values more clearly than their public statements alone. As scrutiny continues, the monarchy faces an opportunity not only to draw boundaries, but to demonstrate that responsibility, and transparency remains central to its role in modern society. As this story reaches its later stages, the focus naturally turns toward long-term consequences rather than immediate headlines. The release of documents, the public debate, and the institutional responses together form a broader case study in how power, tradition, and accountability intersect in the modern era. One of the most enduring effects of this episode is the shift in expectations. Public institutions, particularly those built on symbolism and continuity, are now evaluated through a different lens than in previous decades. Deference has given way to scrutiny, and reputation is increasingly shaped by transparency, rather than tradition alone. This change has not occurred suddenly, but the events surrounding Prince Andrew have accelerated it. The monarchy, like many historic institutions, evolved in an environment where discretion was considered a strength. Matters were handled privately, statements were limited, and time itself often softened public reaction. Today, however, time tends to amplify unresolved questions rather than dissolve them. Digital records do not fade, and public memory is continuously refreshed by new audiences encountering old material for the first time. This dynamic explains why the Epstein-related discussions have remained active despite official distancing. Measures already taken. For many observers, the absence of new developments does not feel like resolution. Instead, it reinforces the sense that key questions remain unanswered, even if no further action is legally required. Another lasting impact concerns internal governance. While much of the discussion has focused on external perception, institutions often use moments like this to reassess internal procedures. Clearer boundaries around representation, stricter oversight of unofficial roles, and improved advisory structures are frequently cited as necessary safeguards. These measures are not admissions of failure, but acknowledgments that systems must adapt to remain effective. The generational dimension is also significant. Younger members of the royal family now carry the responsibility of shaping the institution's future image. Their public work, charitable efforts, and engagement with contemporary issues are often well received. Yet they operate in an environment influenced by past controversies. How successfully they separate their own roles from unresolved narratives will influence public confidence in the years ahead. Public trust, once strained, does not return instantly. It rebuilds gradually through consistency and clarity. For institutions, this means aligning actions with stated values over time, rather than relying on single announcements or symbolic gestures. Each decision contributes incrementally to how credibility is assessed. Importantly, this story has also prompted wider conversations beyond the monarchy. It has encouraged reflection on how influence operates in elite circles, how oversight is applied unevenly across society, and how reputational protection can sometimes delay accountability. These discussions extend into politics, finance, and media, underscoring that the issues raised are not unique to one institution. From this perspective, the Prince Andrew episode functions as a mirror rather than an exception. It reflects broader societal challenges surrounding transparency, responsibility, and the management of power. The attention it has received stems not only from the individuals involved, but from what it reveals about systems that depend heavily on trust. As time passes, the immediate intensity of coverage may diminish, but the lessons remain. Institutions that endure are those willing to learn from scrutiny rather than resist it. They recognize that accountability strengthens legitimacy rather than undermines it. Whether this chapter ultimately marks a turning point or a prolonged period of reassessment will depend on choices made beyond the spotlight. The true measure will not be found in headlines, but in structural changes, clearer standards, and a renewed alignment between public expectation and institutional behavior. In that sense, the story is not fully concluded. It has simply moved from exposure to evaluation, a quieter but more consequential phase. This story is not only about documents or decisions from the past. It is about how institutions respond when trust is tested. Accountability, transparency, and responsibility are not abstract ideals. They are ongoing commitments. How they are upheld now will shape how history remembers this moment and what follows from it.